This project allowed me to learn about the history of farm workers in Florida, their rights or lack of rights, the hardships of their daily lives, the people who pick the fruit and vegetables we eat, and what responsibility we have today to help these farm workers possess more rights and to be treated with dignity. The Great Depression in the United States began with the stock market crash in 1929. However, this period of tremendous financial insecurity started in Florida 3 years earlier, in 1926, when the Florida land boom came to an end. In Florida at this time, money and credit ran out, and people scrambled to find jobs. Florida's already unstable economy was further damaged by two significant hurricanes, one in 1926 and another in 1928. To make matters worse, the Florida citrus industry was hit hard by the Mediterranean fruit fly invasion in 1929. The fruit fly invasion caused citrus production to be reduced by 60%. At the beginning of the 1930s, 1/4 of Florida's population needed some type of public assistance to survive. Many of the unemployed went looking for work in the fields and agriculture industry. Some were migrant workers who traveled from region to region according to the harvest times in these various places. Like Southern California and South Texas, South Florida was established as the hub or starting point for many seasonal workers. Workers who began picking in Florida traveled north to Ohio, Kentucky, Virginia, and New York, and to many other states in the eastern United States. The life of farm workers was often very difficult. During the 1930s, the conditions for farm workers were often deplorable, and farm workers lacked basic rights that workers in other industries had. In 1935, the National Labor Relations Act established rights for industrial workers to unionize. However, this act excluded farm workers because the lobby for agricultural companies was huge and powerful. As a result, the conditions of farm workers remained quite poor, which prompted CBS News to air its groundbreaking documentary, Harvest of Shame, in 1960. This documentary exposed the mistreatment and exploitation of farm workers, who were often taken advantage of by crew leaders who paid the farm workers much less than they were owed, and who were put in very unsafe working conditions. The farm workers would have been fired if they made any kind of complaint. In 1962, Cesar Chavez started the National Farm Workers Association, which became the United Farm Workers of America, or UFW. Chavez led strikes, fasts, and marches that brought public notoriety to the issue of farm workers' rights. As a result of his tireless efforts, Chavez got California to enact the first state legislation officially guaranteeing farm workers the right to unionize, and to effectively fight for more rights on the job and better working conditions. Unfortunately, though, other states did not follow. I became interested in this project because I wanted to know where my food comes from. After I started to learn how fruits and vegetables were picked, I learned that the plight of farm workers in Immokalee, Florida was pretty disturbing. So I traveled to Immokalee, interviewed an activist, Joe Parker, and an Immokalee farm worker, Emilio Galdino. Do you feel like these companies treat you fairly?
Bueno, hoy en día sí, pero hablando de aquellos años, que existían los abusos.
If we're talking about today, then yes, but a number of years ago, no. There was physical and verbal abuse that was very common, sexual harassment that many women working in the fields alongside of me faced, and in those most extreme cases of actual modern day slavery or forced labor. But today we're starting to see these things change as a result of the Fair Food Program, and we're starting to see what we like to call a new day of rights dawning for Florida's farm workers.
What is a right that you would want other farm workers and you to have?
Los derechos, debe ser el cero tolerancia.
I think very generally speaking, just a zero tolerance for the typical abuses that have happened historically. Things like physical and verbal aggressions, for stopping to take a drink of water or wanting to go to the bathroom, sexual harassment that's been such a commonplace thing for so many years, and again, in those most extreme cases, actual forced labor, that we would have an industry where these things were not tolerated.
Do you think that some major companies should have the responsibility of paying a little bit more per bushel of tomatoes so that workers like you can be paid a fair wage?
A eso iniciamos cuando nuestras primeras protestas, marchas que se hicieron.
Yes, definitely. And that's one of the principal reasons why we first started to organize actions and protests in the very early days of our campaign, where we were asking then and are continuing to ask now that these big corporate buyers pay just 1 penny more for every pound of tomatoes that they buy, because we know that that little bit more, that extra penny, is going to make an enormous difference in the life of a farm worker.
Would 1 cent per bushel really make an impact on the quality of life for farm workers, and if so, how?
Yeah, it makes a huge impact, and right now the bonus is variable because we don't have all companies participating, both growers and buyers. But what we're seeing right now, depending on the time of year and how many tomatoes are being sold to participating buyers and who's picking them, et cetera, a number of variables, that farm workers are making anywhere from an extra 10 to 20, sometimes even $90 or $100 at the end of the week, based on that penny more per pound. And since the dawn of the Fair Food Program back in 2011, after the agreement was signed at the end of 2010, 2011 was the first full year of implementation, over $11 million have been paid out by participating buyers into the Fair Food Program, and that have been distributed out to farm workers themselves. So, that's the difference between being able to make your rent at the end of the week and not being able to ensure that your family has 3 meals a day and not. And so they're small things, but really big things, that don't sound like a lot, but for somebody who's working really hard to take care of their family, it's an enormous difference. But at the same time, one thing that we say a lot as Student Farm Worker Alliance is that our struggles are different, but they converge. Meaning, as farm workers and as young people, we're not exploited in the same way, but in many ways, those corporations that are exploiting farm workers are also exploiting us. So for example, we first started talking about it during the Taco Bell campaign, that a company like Taco Bell could put a talking chihuahua on TV, and it would repeat these words, "Yo quiero Taco Bell," and even if you didn't speak a lick of Spanish, you were repeating that, and you knew it meant, "I want Taco Bell." And their thought was, and they actually put this in a report, that young people were actually the new hedonism generation. And what they said that they meant by that was, the only thing that we cared about was satisfying our next desire. And so their conclusion was, if we spend enough money on these advertising campaigns, we can actually get young people to go and buy our tacos and our chalupas without giving a second thought. And they'll just get right up off the couch and go. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about Student Farm Worker Alliance, or one of the beautiful things, is that students are saying, no, actually we care about where our food comes from. We're not just mindless mouths to feed, we're actually really smart. And we're learning about these things, and we believe that we can stand together with farm workers and build something better. And so for that reason, the fact that these companies are very much targeting us on a daily basis too, I think that we as young people have a responsibility to get involved.
The Fair Food Program is the main objective of Joe Parker's organization, the Student Farm Worker Alliance, and the CIW. The goal of the Fair Food Program is to persuade companies to sign the penny more per pound of tomatoes agreement, and to only purchase fruits and vegetables from growers who are part of this program. This program ensures that farm workers have basic rights, such as the right to report instances of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, forced labor, and wage theft without fear of losing their jobs. They are guaranteed by the growers who are part of this program that they will receive certain rights like water and bathroom breaks, shade structures, a reasonable daily start time, and a fair wage. The companies that have agreed to the Fair Food Program are Yum Brands, which includes Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut, and other companies like McDonald's, Burger King, Whole Foods, Subway's, Trader Joe's, and Chipotle. Unfortunately, however, there are several companies that have not signed on to the program. They are Publix, Wendy's, Kroger's, and others. According to the New York Times, the Fair Food Program has been the most successful labor action in the U.S. in the last 20 years. But the companies that have still not joined have held up further progress in the rights of farm workers. It is our responsibility as ethical and moral U.S. citizens to put pressure on Publix and Wendy's and others to join in on the movement to end modern-day slavery in America. As Joe Parker reminded us, schools and students have a powerful voice, and they have a responsibility to make a difference.